සංවර්ධනය වන්නේ කෙලෙසද හඳුනගන්නේ භෞතික ලෙසින්නේ සාර ධර්මද දියුණු වන්නේ
Sangvardhanaya or development is indeed a powerful word. It has shaped countless lives and changed the landscape of entire countries. And yet, it is often used without clear understanding of what it really means and what it comprises. At a time when economic crises around the globe have prompted a serious rethinking of existing development paradigms, and closer to home in post-war context, the thrust of national policy conversation is centered around development. A two-day symposium, aptly titled Reimagining Development, aimed to set in motion a dialogue on alternative concepts to make sense of the current Sri Lankan experience. On the 11th of December 2012, the Centre for Poverty Analysis hosted its annual symposium in Colombo for the 11th consecutive year.
This is a beginning of a conversation. This is not the end. What we are hoping is that in the sessions and in the meetings and in talking to very different people, you will take away something with you that you will be able to continue the conversation in your different spaces. What we would expect in these 2 days is basically to critically examine the concept of development as we know it and reconfigure it in the light of current lived experience. To take development out of its narrow confines by bringing together a variety of professionals, artists, thinkers, ethnographers, development workers, as well as economists, and to move it out of the narrow economic sphere.
Good morning, everybody.
The inaugural panel, made up of academics, researchers and practitioners of the development community, set the stage for the two-day-long symposium, which was built around panel discussions, parallel breakaway sessions, and open forums where participants could engage with policymakers.
Every time when we think in a new context, we always deal with a new set of issues. Some of them are old issues carried over, but also there are new issues as we are seeing. I think that in the recent past, as we discuss the post-MDG issues, we are seeing those new issues coming up in a new way. It is not only climate change, which was not so much there 10 years back, but also the issue of inequality and inclusiveness. In many ways, it is coming along with that.
With continued economic growth, growth has ensured rising living standards. But the ability to lift boats has been undermined by growing inequality.
Think of our recent past, and let's not forget, Sri Lanka was hailed as a model of development in 70s. Development studies was always talking of Sri Lanka. So I was always been asking question, how come in this country there was a possibility of this civil war? And from the 1970s, we have been sorting out lots of our issues through violence. And I personally believe that history is still to be written.
Relationships lie at the heart of any process of social transformation. Relationships between the ruler and the ruled, the powerful and the powerless, the oppressor and the oppressed, the developer and the developee, the policymaker and the practitioner, the citizen and the state.
So there's that whole theme up here. What is the planet that we want to see? And that's kind of an underlying principle. Then there was a lot of people referred to kind of underlying
the concept of sustainable development has been in the domain for over 20 years. This session attempted to break down the present application of this concept and to raise the question, has sustainable development become mere rhetoric, or could it be a pragmatic solution to the challenges we face?
Look for places that you can find that you can raise that kind of a momentum and get different people to agree that this is a good thing. Not only coming at it from an environmental perspective, but it has other benefits.
Unpacking the concept of knowledge hierarchies as a manifestation of the relationships between knowledge and power, this discussion explored how power privileges certain knowledge over others.
And we looked at post-war justice and with the way women in Batticaloa district particularly looked at their submissions to the Lessons Learned and Reconciliation Committee. We looked at mathematization of economics, how mathematics has begun to play a big role in economics and how that affects the way economic thought is developed. We deconstructed, as it were, the whole concept of participation, which has become almost an orthodoxy of development. We looked at the implications of fragility, the term fragility and fragile states, and what it means when people work together.
Across the developing world, urban development is transforming and reshaping the urban landscape. But what implications do change in spaces have on an individual and collective sense of belonging and identity? This interactive session brought together planners and citizens to reflect on the current models of urban development in the country.
Land as it is seen now is monetized, so there is a financial value of land, but land actually is much more than a monetary value. It also provides shelter for people, there are public spaces to be used by citizens of the city. So there is a social value also to land apart from the financial aspect.
There is a global discourse on women's political representation and particularly on women's representation in local government.
The concept for that for the session came out of this idea of who is the woman in the development process? How do we construct her? What are her characteristics? How does she participate in it? So we approached this idea of woman from a socio-cultural perspective, a political perspective, and an economic perspective. So trying to understand how she is constructed in each of these spheres.
Development, whether it is a project, program or policy, brings with it a set of values. The Development and Ethics session aimed to critique development from an ethics, values and morality perspective.
The current structures have a fixedness, objectivity, lack of space for uncertainty. So things are certain. There are certain ways you have to do things. There isn't too much space for people to be wondering whether I should move out of this system, shall we do it a different way? So that's why this issue of ethics comes in.
We saw development as a kind of means towards a certain end, and the end we thought was well-being. And we were interested in looking at how people defined well-being, which was the goal of development, because we thought that if you know what you want at the end of the day, then it's easier to figure out how to get there, which is what the development process should be doing. Happiness or well-being is relative. It comes from a comparison, how you are placed. It also depends on context.
How do artists capture and manifest development? Are their imaginings different from the mainstream development idea? In the quest to reimagining development, this session explored these questions with the hope of examining whether there is reflexivity between development and art.
Through the cinema, we could talk about things that are actually not falling into reports, log frames, indicators, so on and so forth. So we felt that cinema would be able to give development a more subjective perspective.
Reimagining development through visual and performance arts was a refreshing new feature in this year's symposium. Giving new interpretation to traditional art forms, a healing ritual with a twist was presented as a Tovil ceremony to exorcise the demons of development. Popular characters from Sri Lankan puppet theatre came to life, but instead of the usual song and dance, this time they had quite a bit to say.
ඉතින් පුතේ කාලෙන් කාලෙට වෙනස් වෙන අන්දමට අපි ගන්න තීරණත් වෙනස් වෙන්න ඕනි. සංවර්ධනය වේවා වෙන යම්කිසි දෙයක් වේවා අපිත් කාලෙන් කාලෙට වෙනස් වෙන්න ඕනි කියලා තමයි මම කියන්නේ.
The idea here is that development is something that we can imagine for ourselves and something that we might be able to implement. So there is really hope in imagining something and working towards that.
At the end of the 2 days, the discussion comes a full circle to reflect again why we felt the need to revisit, reassess and reimagine the idea of development. Key ideas that this reimagining conversation have highlighted may show some pathways towards a better concept of development. It is clear that we need better ways to identify development and that we need to look beyond economic growth. Perhaps we should look to the past to reimagine the future. This idea particularly resonates in Sri Lanka, where the post-independence government was very much focused on social policies which are inclusive and universal. Challenging the orthodoxies about the role of the state is another key idea, as some conversations focused on the role of the state to deliver development. Finally, development should be seen as a process as opposed to an end goal, and the need for inclusivity and equity in this process. As the symposium came to an end, policymakers were invited to an open forum to engage with the members of the development community and to share their views on the discourse that had begun to take shape in the course of 2 days.
There are significant disparities regionally, significant gender disparities, violence against women is on the rise. And so in some ways, while we may tick the boxes in terms of some of the measurements, some of the indicators that are being used, maybe it is also time for us to rethink the boxes.
Growth is fundamental in development. I mean, you can't talk about development without talking about growth. So I think, there is no way in which you can dichotomize these two.
There's an American humorist, P.J. Rokes, who makes a strong case for something known as the dead dog index. What he says is that in Latin American countries, the degree of economic development is inversely proportional to the length of time its authorities take in removing the carcass of a dead dog from a public place. So, you can different countries can have different measurements or perceptions of development.
සැබවින්ම දශක ගණනාවක් තිස්සේ අපිට අවශ්‍ය වී තිබුණා සංවර්ධනය පිළිබඳව නව මානයන් නව දිශාවන් සොයාගෙන යෑමේ පිපාසයක් මම හිතන්නේ ලෝකේ පුරා විකල්ප මතධාරීන් විසින් ඉදිරිපත් කරමින් තිබුණා.
There are no easy answers or magic formulas here. Through reimagining development, a new conversation on an old topic was started. An exercise in critical reflection and reimagining. To make a meaningful impact, those who were part of the process must carry with them the momentum and spirit created in the course of the 2 days. That will be the only way to ensure that our understanding of development will not fall short of the ever-changing and diverse lived experience of it.